What would you do if you knew your time was running out? It's a question we all wonder about, even if we don't dare to say it out loud. What would you do if the clock was ticking on your life, and you had just a few months, a few weeks, or even just a few days left? Would you change everything, or would you try to hold on to what you have left, hoping for a miracle? Sarah Miller never thought she would be the one to face such a question. At 34, she was a teacher, a wife, a mother. Life was far from perfect, but it was hers. She had a loving husband, John, who was her rock, and their 6-year-old daughter, Emily, who filled their home with laughter. Sarah's world revolved around them, her students, her friends, and the future. The idea of losing it all had never crossed her mind. She believed she had time, so much time. Then, one phone call shattered everything. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the cancer is in the advanced stage. You have about 3 to 6 months. The words hung in the air, thick with finality. Sarah's hand trembled as she gripped the phone, unable to process what she had just heard. Cancer. Stage 4. No time left. She dropped the phone to the kitchen counter, the words echoing in her mind as she stared at the wall in front of her. For a long moment, it felt as though the entire world had paused, leaving her suspended in a state of disbelief. Sarah wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to say goodbye. There was so much she still wanted to do, so much she still needed to do. Her life, her beautiful, imperfect life, was about to be ripped from her, and there was nothing she could do about it. She sat there, frozen, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and fear. What would happen to John and Emily when she was gone? What kind of mother would she be, leaving her daughter behind in a world without her? Was there anything left to say, to do, to make up for all the things she hadn't said or done yet? Tears began to fill her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily. "I can't cry," she told herself. "I need to be strong. I need to be strong for them." But the weight of the news was unbearable, and she couldn't stop the flood of emotions that followed. As she sat there, staring at the silent phone, an odd thought crossed her mind. What would happen to her in those final moments? Sarah had heard stories, people who had seen the light just before they died, people who claimed to have had life-changing revelations in their last breaths. But was it real? Or was it just some strange psychological effect, the mind's way of coping with the inevitable? Her mind raced, and she found herself Googling, "What happens when you die?" a desperate attempt to understand something that seemed so completely outside her control. "Is there an afterlife?" she typed into the search bar. "What does it feel like to die?" She clicked through article after article, some grounded in science, others in spirituality, some pure speculation. One article mentioned the famous near-death experiences, NDEs, where people described encountering loved ones who had passed, walking toward a bright light, or even feeling a sense of overwhelming peace. The idea that death might not be the end fascinated Sarah. Was there really something after? Or was it all just the brain firing off its last signals before shutting down completely? She clicked on a YouTube video titled, "What Happens Right Before You Die?" and watched a man explain the physiological changes that occur when a person is nearing death. A drop in body temperature, the slowing of heartbeats, the way the brain sometimes releases endorphins to numb the pain. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. She wanted to know, what would happen in those final moments? Would she feel anything? Would she see anything? She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor, startling her. No, she wasn't going to let this obsession take over. She needed to be with her family, to spend her remaining time with the people who mattered most. She needed to live. But how? How was she supposed to live when she knew death was knocking at her door? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back to reality. She glanced at the screen. John. "Hey, babe, how are you doing?" His voice sounded so normal, so comforting. He had no idea what had just happened, and the thought of telling him made Sarah's chest tighten. How could she possibly tell him? How could she shatter his world like this? She took a deep breath and put the phone to her ear. "Hey," she whispered. "We need to talk." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the coming chapters, Sarah's journey will unfold, from denial to acceptance, from the scientific to the spiritual, as she explores the mysteries of life and death. What does the science really say? And what do the stories reveal? Stay tuned to find out. Sarah Miller was not someone who thought about death. She was too busy living. And in her 34 years, life had been a beautiful, chaotic dance of triumphs and struggles, of love and loss. But before that fateful phone call, before cancer reared its ugly head and turned her world upside down, Sarah had spent most of her life taking the small, precious moments for granted. Born in a small town just outside of Seattle, Sarah had grown up in a family that valued hard work and close-knit relationships. Her father, a mechanic, and her mother, a teacher, had done everything they could to make their home a place filled with warmth and love. Sarah was the second of 3 children, with an older brother, Luke, and a younger sister, Emily, who Sarah had always considered her best friend. Their house was always bustling with activity, the smell of home-cooked meals filling the air, and the sound of laughter echoing through the walls. But Sarah's childhood wasn't without its scars. When she was just 9 years old, her mother passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. Sarah's world crumbled. She'd been incredibly close to her mother, and her loss left a hole in Sarah's heart that would never quite heal. As the family struggled to cope with the void, Sarah's father, though loving, didn't know how to fill the emotional gaps left by their mother's absence. It was then that Sarah, still a young girl, began to develop a deep sense of responsibility, to be the strong one, to take care of the people she loved, even when she didn't know how. In high school, Sarah became known as the dependable one. Her friends relied on her to be the voice of reason in their chaotic teenage lives. She helped her younger sister, Emily, navigate the tricky waters of adolescence, and she spent long hours helping her father manage their household after her mother's death. She pushed herself to excel in school, knowing that education was the key to a better future. And that future, it seemed, would be full of possibility. After high school, Sarah went on to college, studying education. She knew she wanted to teach, to help others in the way her mother had done before her. It wasn't just a job for Sarah, it was a calling. She wanted to give children the tools to succeed, to help them grow, just as she had learned to do in her own life. It was during her sophomore year at the University of Washington that Sarah met John. He was a charismatic young man with a quick smile and a compassionate heart. John was studying engineering, and his passion for his work matched Sarah's enthusiasm for education. Their connection was immediate, and within months, they were inseparable. They had shared dreams, shared values, and shared ambitions. For Sarah, John was the person she had always dreamed of, someone who would walk beside her through life, someone who could fill the empty spaces her mother had left behind. They talked about their future, about getting married, buying a house, having children. And then, in a small park on a quiet autumn evening, John had asked her to be his forever. Of course, she had said yes. They got married 2 years later, and shortly after, they welcomed their daughter, Emily, into the world. A tiny, perfect baby who filled their home with joy and laughter. Sarah was overwhelmed with love, and yet, there was always a part of her that remained cautious. Maybe it was because of her mother's sudden death, or maybe it was because Sarah had learned to expect the unexpected, but she had never allowed herself to completely relax. Life, as she had learned too early, could be fleeting. The next few years were filled with the whirlwind of raising a young child and balancing her career. Sarah loved teaching, but the job was demanding. She was constantly preparing lessons, grading papers, and attending school events. At times, she felt stretched too thin, but she never complained. She wanted to be the perfect wife, mother, and teacher, to prove that she could balance it all. But despite the constant striving, there was always a lingering feeling of being overwhelmed. The guilt of not giving enough to her family, her students, and herself weighed heavily on her shoulders. When she first found out about her cancer diagnosis, Sarah had been struggling with that very balance. She had missed several doctor appointments due to work and family commitments, and by the time she finally went in for a checkup, the diagnosis had come too late. The doctor's words rang in her ears now, a constant, haunting reminder of her own fragility. 3 to 6 months. Suddenly, everything felt different. Her life, the very life she had worked so hard to build, now seemed so incredibly fragile, like a house of cards that could tumble down with a single gust of wind. It was in this moment of reflection that Sarah began to wonder about the future she might never see. She had lived so much for others, for her family, for her career, for the expectations she had set for herself. But now, with only months to live, she realized she hadn't taken the time to live for herself. Her mind drifted back to the many nights she had spent sleepless, balancing the needs of her daughter, her husband, and her students. Had she truly lived? Had she truly appreciated the moments that mattered most? She had always thought there would be time for everything. Time to travel, to relax, to truly explore the world and herself. But time had run out. And that was when Sarah started to ask herself the questions she had never dared to ask before. What happens when you know your time is near? What would she do with the days, the hours, the minutes she had left? She thought about her family, about John, and about Emily. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving them behind, but she knew she had to be brave. She had to find a way to make the most of what she had left. And so, Sarah began to take a new path. One filled with difficult choices, painful realizations, and unexpected discoveries. The first step on this journey was understanding what it meant to truly live, even as death loomed in the distance. Sarah had always been the type of person to handle things herself. Whether it was juggling the demands of teaching, raising a family, or maintaining a busy social life, she took everything on with a sense of duty. There was no time to be weak, no space to wallow. She had responsibilities, people who depended on her. That's how she lived her life. And up until now, that had been enough. But the cancer, the diagnosis that had come so suddenly, so violently into her life, had shaken Sarah to her core. It wasn't just the physical reality of the illness, or the fact that it was slowly taking away her future. It was the feeling of losing control. She had no say in this. No power. For the first time, Sarah felt completely helpless, and it was something she didn't know how to handle. Every morning, she woke up with the weight of her diagnosis pressing on her chest. 3 to 6 months. That's what they told her. Some days, she couldn't even bring herself to get out of bed, feeling the overwhelming sadness that came with knowing her life would be cut short. Other days, she forced herself to move, to do the things she always did, to make the most of the time she had left. But each step was heavier than the last. As the days passed, the internal battle within Sarah grew stronger. Should she tell John? Should she tell Emily? Or would they be better off if she kept this secret, sheltered them from the impending storm? It was impossible to ignore the pain of imagining a life without her. She couldn't bear to see the sorrow in their eyes, couldn't bear to watch John crumble under the weight of the truth. But the burden of keeping it from them was eating her alive. One evening, as the sun began to set and the house fell into that peaceful silence that always settled in after dinner, Sarah sat across from John at the kitchen table. He was flipping through a catalog, looking for a new camping tent for their upcoming summer trip. Emily was in her room, drawing pictures of animals and fairy tales. It was a typical evening, and yet everything felt so wrong. Sarah had been sitting in this same kitchen, in this same chair, countless times before. But now each moment felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the inevitable. John glanced up from the catalog, sensing her change in demeanor. "You okay?" His voice was gentle, but there was a slight edge of concern in it. He had noticed the difference in her lately, the long silences, the distracted look in her eyes. But he didn't know why. Not yet. Sarah smiled faintly. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just a little tired, that's all." But John didn't buy it. He pushed the catalog aside and leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You haven't been yourself lately. Talk to me, Sarah. What's going on?" A wave of frustration washed over Sarah. She felt like she was drowning in her own secret. The truth was clawing at her, begging to be let out. But how could she say it? How could she tell him the one thing that would change their lives forever? Before she could respond, the phone rang. Sarah's stomach twisted at the sudden interruption, the sound pulling her away from the raw moment. She looked at John, then back at the phone, and decided to answer it. It was her doctor. The voice on the other end sounded clinical, detached. "Mrs. Miller, I just wanted to confirm the details for your upcoming treatment plan. We'll need you to come in tomorrow for some additional scans. We want to get a better idea of how the cancer is progressing." As the doctor spoke, Sarah's mind began to numb. She knew what he was saying, but it felt like she was hearing the words from a distance. Treatment, progression, scans. It was all the same. There was nothing left to fight. When the call ended, Sarah turned to John, who was watching her carefully. He could see the distress in her face, the way she had zoned out during the conversation. He could feel the air in the room growing heavier. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of worry. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The moment had arrived. There was no more avoiding it. No more pretending. "John," Sarah whispered, her voice faltering. "I have cancer. And it's advanced. The doctors say I have 3 to 6 months left." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. John froze, his face pale. He didn't respond right away. He couldn't. The room seemed to grow smaller, suffocating. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what she had just said settled in, and neither could move. John stood up slowly, his hands trembling as he reached for her. No, Sarah, this isn't happening," he stammered. His voice cracked with the panic rising in his chest. "You're not. I mean, there has to be something we can do. This can't be real." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, but she fought them back. She couldn't break down now, not in front of him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing else they can do." John's eyes searched her face, looking for some sign of hope, some way out of the nightmare she had just thrown them into. But there was nothing. There was no magic cure, no miracle waiting around the corner. Only the cold, hard truth. "But we can still make the most of this time, right?" he asked, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his attempt to remain optimistic. "We can fight this together. We'll figure it out." But Sarah shook her head slowly. "There's no more fight left in me, John. I'm just running out of time." The air in the room felt thick with grief, with fear, and with a sense of helplessness neither of them had ever known. The future, once so certain, was now a void, and no matter how hard they tried to hold on to hope, it seemed to slip further and further away. As the night stretched on, they sat in silence, both of them trapped in their own thoughts. John, desperately trying to figure out how to save her, and Sarah, just trying to figure out how to survive the days ahead. The days that followed Sarah's confession were a blur of emotions, each one more intense than the last. It felt as if she was living in 2 separate worlds, one where she was a mother, wife, and teacher, going about her daily life as if nothing had changed, and another where she was a patient, a woman with a ticking clock, slowly running out of time. In both realities, the weight of her diagnosis was inescapable, but in one, she fought to pretend everything was normal. In the other, she faced the inevitable, her mind clouded by fear and regret. It was John who insisted on getting a second opinion. "We have to try everything," he had said, his voice desperate yet determined. He wouldn't accept the diagnosis. Not yet. And so they made the decision to consult with specialists in a larger city a few hours away, hoping for a miracle, hoping for something Sarah could hold on to. As the date for the consultation approached, Sarah found herself dreading it more and more. She wanted to be hopeful for John's sake, to give him something to cling to, but deep down, she knew this was it. The car ride to the hospital felt like a surreal dream. Emily was in the back seat, her face pressed against the window as she watched the landscape blur past. She was so young, so innocent, unaware of the storm that was about to ravage their world. Sarah couldn't help but glance at her daughter in the rearview mirror, her heart aching at the thought of leaving her behind. Emily had so much potential, so much life ahead of her. But would she ever truly know her mother? Would she remember her? John held Sarah's hand tightly in his, but she could feel the tension in his grip. He was afraid of the truth, afraid of losing her, afraid of what would happen if the doctors confirmed her worst fear. But as they approached the hospital, Sarah's heart grew heavier. This wasn't the solution. This wasn't the miracle. No amount of doctors, no amount of treatment could change the inevitable. They entered the building, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow over the waiting room. The sound of murmurs, the shuffle of shoes on the linoleum floor, the soft ringing of phones, it was all so ordinary, so mundane. And yet, for Sarah, it felt like she was standing at the edge of the abyss, looking into a world that no longer made sense. The doctor's office was small, decorated with certificates and medical posters that looked strangely out of place in a moment like this. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach as they sat down. The doctor entered shortly after, a tall man with glasses and a kind face. He was young, confident, and his words were measured. He explained the diagnosis in clinical terms, repeating what Sarah already knew. The cancer was aggressive, spreading quickly, and the prognosis was grim. However, he also mentioned a possible treatment option, a new clinical trial that had recently shown promise in extending life for patients with her type of cancer. The word hope hung in the air, but Sarah didn't hear it. She couldn't. She had already made peace with the fact that no one could save her, not now. Her mind, her heart, had already prepared for the worst. After the appointment, as they left the hospital, Sarah felt as though the weight of the world had doubled. John, ever the optimist, kept pushing for them to move forward with the trial, to start treatment immediately. He talked about the possibilities, the chances for remission, the doctor's optimism. He tried so hard to convince Sarah that there was still time to fight, time to change the outcome. But Sarah wasn't sure she could take that path. She wasn't sure she could go through the endless rounds of treatment, the harsh side effects, the toll it would take on her body, her family, and her mind. She wasn't sure it was worth it. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a heavy heart. She had made the decision, but she wasn't sure if it was the right one. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time to make the most important decision of her life. That afternoon, she found herself sitting on the porch of their home, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. The air was cool and crisp, the scent of pine lingering in the breeze. She could hear the faint sound of Emily's laughter from the backyard as she played with the neighbor's dog. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to breathe in the peacefulness. For the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: peace. It was then that she realized what she needed to do. The fight she had been waging wasn't just against the cancer, it was against time. Against the inevitable end she was trying to avoid. But Sarah had learned, in her short time with this diagnosis, that time wasn't something she could control. It wasn't something she could win against. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about how long she had left. Maybe it was about how she spent those days. Her decision was made. She wouldn't pursue aggressive treatment. She wouldn't spend her final months in a battle she knew she couldn't win. Instead, she would focus on what mattered most: her family. She would spend the time she had left loving them, cherishing the moments she still had. There were no guarantees in life, no promises. But in those final months, she would choose to live. Sarah's heart was heavy with the weight of her decision, but there was also a sense of liberation. She was no longer fighting to extend her life for the sake of it. Instead, she was going to embrace the time she had left, to make memories that would last forever. Later that night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Sarah felt a quiet resolve settle over her. Emily was talking about her day at school, and John was asking about Sarah's appointment. It was so normal, so painfully beautiful. Sarah took a deep breath, and when they both turned to her with expectant eyes, she simply smiled. "I've made my decision," Sarah said softly, her voice steady, yet full of emotion. "I'm not going to fight anymore. I'm going to live." John looked at her, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. But then, he saw it in her eyes, that quiet certainty, that peace she had found. He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but trusting her. They didn't need to understand everything. They just needed to be together. And so, Sarah took the first step into this new chapter of her life. The journey would be difficult, but it would be hers to define. Sarah's decision to embrace the time she had left wasn't one she made lightly. It was a heavy, earth-shattering choice that carried with it a mixture of peace and sorrow. She'd chosen to stop fighting against something she couldn't control. She had chosen, instead, to make the most of what time she had left, to live fully, even as the shadows of the inevitable grew longer. But that peace she had found was fragile. Every day, as she looked at John and Emily, the weight of her mortality pressed on her, reminding her of what was coming. It was hard not to feel a pang of guilt for what she was putting them through. How could she leave them behind? How could she say goodbye to the people she loved more than anything in this world? That was the hardest part. John had tried to understand, tried to accept her decision, but every conversation ended in silence, and the silence between them was growing louder. There were no more fights, no more heated arguments. Instead, there were just quiet moments where they both pretended to be okay. John was doing his best to stay strong, to keep things normal, but Sarah could see the cracks forming. He wasn't okay, and neither was she. The emotional climax of her journey came one cold, rainy afternoon, when the storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos within. Sarah had spent the day sitting on the porch, watching the rain wash over the landscape. The heavy drops fell, creating ripples on the surface of the small pond in their yard, but they couldn't cleanse the sadness that weighed her heart down. Emily had come out to join her as she often did. Her daughter, wise beyond her years, could sense something was wrong, but she couldn't yet understand what it was. She sat down beside Sarah, wrapping her small arms around her mother. "Mom, why do you look so sad all the time?" Emily asked, her voice soft and curious. Her innocence, her purity, broke Sarah's heart in ways she couldn't explain. Sarah smiled weakly, brushing her fingers through Emily's hair. She wanted to shield her from the truth, to protect her from the weight of it all, but the burden of hiding it was becoming too much. Emily needed to know, even if it was the hardest thing Sarah would ever have to say. "Sweetheart, sometimes bad things happen, and we can't stop them. I'm really sick, and the doctors say I don't have much time left." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Emily looked up at her, her brow furrowing in confusion. She didn't fully understand. She couldn't. But that didn't make the truth any less real. "But you're going to get better, right?" Emily asked, her voice trembling, hoping that what she wanted to believe was true. Sarah's throat tightened as she forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going to get better." The tears she'd been holding back for so long finally came, slipping down her cheeks as she pulled Emily closer. Her daughter clung to her, as if she could somehow hold on tight enough to stop the inevitable. But Sarah knew better. She could feel the inevitability of it all. Just as Sarah thought her heart would break from the weight of this moment, John stepped onto the porch, his face drawn with the same sadness that mirrored her own. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he'd seen Emily's expression, the way her tiny hands were clutched around Sarah's arms. It was enough to break him. John walked toward them, kneeling beside Sarah and Emily. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me you were planning to tell her?" His words weren't angry, but the hurt was evident. She could feel it. He had wanted to be there, to share the burden with her, and yet she had carried it alone. She had kept him out of the loop because she didn't want him to suffer with her, and now she realized that was a mistake. He was suffering, regardless of whether she told him or not. She didn't know what to say at first. There was so much between them that had gone unsaid. But she finally spoke, her voice quiet and trembling. "I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to hurt either of you. But now I see I'm only making it worse." John took Sarah's hand, holding it tight in his. There was a moment of stillness before he spoke again, his voice raw. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. I'm not leaving you. I know it's hard, but we're in this together. For better or worse, we're going to get through this as a family. Together." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, and she nodded slowly. She knew, deep down, that this was the hardest thing she would ever have to go through, but John's words reminded her that she wasn't alone. As much as she had tried to protect them from the inevitable, they were her family. They were in this with her, and no matter how much time they had left, they would face it as one. And then, Emily looked up at Sarah, her wide eyes filled with a strange mixture of confusion and trust. "Mom," she whispered. "Is everything going to be okay?" It was a simple question. The kind of question a child asks when they don't understand, but need to know that everything will turn out okay. Sarah looked at her daughter, her heart aching. "No, sweetheart. Everything won't be okay, but we'll make it through together. We'll love each other, and we'll make the most of the time we have. And that will be enough." As Sarah said those words, she realized something profound. It was enough. The love they shared, the time they had left, was all that truly mattered. Time, in its cruelest form, would steal so much from them. But love was forever. It transcended everything, even death itself. As Sarah sat there, with John by her side and Emily wrapped in her arms, a deep peace settled over her. It wasn't the peace of avoiding the inevitable. It was the peace of accepting it. Of knowing that the love she had for them was eternal, and that it would outlast the physical body, outlast the cancer, outlast the days and months ahead. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days after Sarah's conversation with John and Emily passed in a gentle blur. There was an unspoken shift within the family, a silent acknowledgement of the harsh reality they were all facing, but also a collective decision to cherish the moments they had left. Sarah had come to terms with her choice, and though it was still incredibly hard, she no longer carried the weight of fear and uncertainty. Instead, she focused on what truly mattered: love, connection, and making memories that would outlast her. Emily, in her innocence, adapted in ways that Sarah couldn't have imagined. She began to ask less about what was going to happen in the future and more about the small, everyday things that made life beautiful. Emily's laughter was no longer laced with worry, but with the joy of being alive, of being present. John, too, had changed. He no longer wore the mask of stoic strength, but instead let his vulnerability show. There were moments when he would sit beside Sarah, his eyes filled with a quiet sorrow, but there were also moments of pure joy. When they shared a quiet evening at home, when they watched Emily dance around the living room, or when they simply held each other in silence. In those moments, Sarah realized that the love they shared was enough. It was everything. One morning, a few weeks after that difficult conversation, Sarah woke up to the sound of birds singing outside the window. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light into their bedroom. She turned to John, who was still asleep beside her, his breathing steady. A sense of calm washed over her as she watched him, his face soft, free of the tension that had consumed him in the past. She reached out to gently touch his hand, and when he stirred and opened his eyes, he smiled at her. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice still thick with sleep. "Good morning," Sarah replied, her voice steady, her heart full. For a moment, they just lay there, silent, in each other's arms. There was nothing more to say. Everything had already been said. They were together, and in that moment, that was enough. The day unfolded slowly, as days often do when there's no rush to make the most of time. Sarah spent the morning with Emily, taking a long walk through the garden. It had been one of Sarah's favorite places to visit during her good days, the vibrant flowers, the peaceful sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the smell of fresh earth. Today, it felt even more sacred. She and Emily worked together to plant some new flowers, picking out colors and varieties that would brighten the garden in the months ahead. There was something so profoundly beautiful about this simple, shared task, something that felt like a quiet defiance against the darkness, a way of leaving something behind. Something that would continue to bloom long after she was gone. In the afternoon, Sarah gathered her family together in the living room for what she called their memory day. She had no idea how much time she had left, but she wanted to make sure that they would always have these moments to look back on. They went through old photo albums, laughing at pictures from their past, at the silly moments and milestones. Emily loved hearing stories about when she was little, about the funny things she used to do. Sarah and John laughed together, too, at the photos of their wedding day, at the memories of trips they had taken together. It was a day filled with love, with tears, but also with gratitude. Gratitude for the life they had lived together, for the family they had created. As the evening drew near, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The fear of the unknown had begun to subside, replaced by a quiet certainty that she had made the right choice. The time she had left, however much or little it was, would be spent in the most meaningful way possible. She would not spend her last months in fear, in despair, but in love and presence. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Sarah and John sat outside on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the sky. It was a clear night, the air crisp and refreshing. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just sat there, side by side, their hands intertwined, watching the world go by. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the rustle of leaves were the only things that filled the silence. Eventually, John turned to her, his voice low and full of emotion. "Sarah, I don't know how I'm going to do this without you. I don't know how to say goodbye." Sarah's heart tightened. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that the hardest part would come when she had to leave him. The thought of it made her chest ache, but she had no words to offer that would make it any easier. She had tried to find a way to prepare him, to prepare Emily, but there was no preparation for this kind of loss. There was only acceptance and love. "John," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears that welled up in her eyes, "I don't want you to say goodbye. I want you to remember the love we shared. I want you to carry that with you, and when I'm gone, I want you to live. Live for me, for Emily. Keep going. Keep loving." John looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You can," Sarah said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "Because you're strong, and because love never dies." They sat in silence again, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. Sarah wasn't sure how long they sat there, but eventually, the cool night air began to chill them. They stood up together, and Sarah placed a kiss on John's cheek, a soft, lingering kiss. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." The days continued to pass, and each one felt like a gift, however fleeting. They weren't perfect. There were still moments of sadness, moments when the weight of what was happening felt unbearable. But through it all, Sarah had made her peace. She had chosen to live, fully and without regret. She had chosen love, even in the face of death. And in that choice, she had found the most profound sense of meaning. The days seemed to stretch on forever, yet they passed by in a quiet, inevitable rush. Sarah had come to terms with the idea that time was no longer a luxury she could afford. Each morning, as she awoke to the soft light filtering through the blinds, she was reminded that there was so much left unsaid, so much left undone. But she also knew that the moments she had left were precious, and she intended to fill them with as much love and meaning as possible. Her body had begun to show the signs of the toll the disease was taking. The energy that once came easily to her now felt like a rare gift, something to be cherished and used sparingly. But in the face of her diminishing strength, she refused to let the illness define her. She found herself pushing past the physical exhaustion to spend time with her family, to experience the beauty of the world, even in its simplest forms. There was a sense of urgency in the air now, a quiet understanding between Sarah, John, and Emily that each day could be their last. But rather than focusing on the impending loss, they made the conscious decision to focus on the present, on the love they shared, on the memories they were still creating. One of the most important things Sarah had come to realize was that, despite everything, she could still make an impact on the world around her. She may not be able to change her fate, but she could still affect the lives of those she loved. And so, with that in mind, she spent her last weeks preparing. Not just emotionally, but practically as well. She wrote letters to Emily, letters that she hoped would serve as a guide for her daughter when she was older, letters filled with love, wisdom, and encouragement. She made sure that everything was in place for John to be able to carry on, even without her by his side. The most profound moments, though, came not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday interactions. She would sit with Emily in the evenings, reading her favorite books and telling stories. She would watch John work in the garden, his hands moving through the soil with a sense of peace she admired. She would listen to their laughter, a sound that seemed to carry more meaning now than it ever had before. But there were also the hard moments. Moments when the physical pain became overwhelming, when Sarah had to face the reality of her declining health. These moments were difficult, and there were times when she allowed herself to break down, to cry in the arms of John, who was still her rock, her constant companion. But through every tear, there was always the undercurrent of love. As the days grew shorter, Sarah's condition worsened. She became weaker, and the need for pain management became more pressing. Yet, even as she faced the physical challenges of her illness, she remained determined to stay present, to live as fully as she could. The doctor had told her that the end was near, that it could be any day now. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She had found peace in her journey, and though she didn't know exactly how much time she had left, she was at peace with the knowledge that she had lived the way she wanted to, with love, with purpose, and with grace. The final day came quietly. It was a Thursday morning, and the sun was rising softly over the horizon. John had left for a few hours to take care of some errands, and Emily was at a neighbor's house. Sarah had spent the morning reflecting on everything she had done, everything she had experienced. Her mind wandered to her family, to the love they shared, and to the beautiful moments that had defined her life. She was no longer in pain, no longer afraid. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of calm, as if she had already crossed into the next phase of her journey. When John returned home, he found her lying peacefully in bed, a soft smile on her face. It was the most serene he had seen her in weeks. He knew, in that moment, that she was at peace not just with her illness, but with everything. She had accepted the inevitability of death, but she had also chosen to live fully, to embrace the time she had left, and to leave behind a legacy of love and strength. John sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. He whispered her name softly, but she did not respond. He kissed her forehead gently, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The weight of everything, the years they had shared, the family they had built, the love that had defined their lives settled over him like a warm, comforting blanket. He wasn't ready to say goodbye, but in his heart, he knew that Sarah had already found peace. That afternoon, Sarah passed away. It was a quiet passing without drama or fear. She slipped away in the comfort of her own home, surrounded by the love she had nurtured throughout her life. The room was still, save for the soft sound of the wind outside. John sat by her side, holding her hand, and for a brief moment, he could almost feel her presence still with him. Emily came home later that day. She had returned to a world that had changed forever, a world without her mother. The grief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the love that had always surrounded her. John held her as they both wept, but in their sorrow, there was also a sense of gratitude for the time they had shared with Sarah. They had loved deeply, and that love would continue to live on, even after her passing. In the weeks and months that followed, life slowly began to return to a new normal for John and Emily. There was grief, yes, deep, soul-wrenching grief. But there was also healing and there was love. John often found himself reflecting on Sarah's last days, on the way she had lived with such grace, such acceptance. She had faced death not with fear, but with a profound understanding of what truly mattered. She had embraced her family, her love, her legacy. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of their lives. Emily grew older, and John carried on, always with Sarah's memory in his heart. And though Sarah was no longer physically with them, her spirit, the love she had instilled in their family, remained. It lived on in every memory, in every moment they shared. Months had passed since Sarah's passing, and the world had quietly moved on, as it always does. The days had grown longer, and the seasons shifted as they always do, carrying the weight of time with them. But for John and Emily, the world still felt like a different place. The absence of Sarah was a quiet but constant presence in their lives, a reminder that everything had changed, that nothing would ever be the same again. John had spent the first few weeks in a haze, struggling to find his footing in a world without his wife. He had spent years by her side, and now, without her, everything seemed unfamiliar. He woke up each morning to a silence that felt too loud, too hollow. The house, once filled with the warmth of Sarah's laughter and the bustle of family life, now felt empty, even though Emily was there. Emily had been a source of strength for him in many ways. Her resilience amazed him, even though he knew she, too, was struggling in her own way. She was only a child, but her wisdom and capacity for love were beyond her years. They had clung to each other, leaning on each other in ways that they never had before. And yet, despite all of this, there was a profound sense of loss that neither could escape. The first time Emily asked about Sarah's absence, it was a question that John had been dreading. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming home?" The question hung in the air like a weight, and for a moment, John was at a loss. How do you explain to a child that their mother is gone forever? How do you answer when you yourself don't have all the answers? But he had learned from Sarah. He had learned that the best way to approach these difficult questions was with honesty, tempered by love. So he took a deep breath and sat down beside Emily. "Sweetheart, Mommy's not coming home," he said gently, his voice breaking. "But she's always with us. She's in our hearts, in our memories. We carry her with us every day." Emily didn't understand completely, but she nodded solemnly, as if the truth had settled somewhere deep inside her. John knew that grief, especially for someone so young, was not something that could be explained in a single conversation. But he also knew that he would help Emily navigate this, just as Sarah had always been there for them. As the months wore on, John began to heal in small, imperceptible ways. He still missed Sarah terribly, still longed for her presence, but he started to find moments of peace. He spent time with Emily, not just as a father, but as a partner in her healing process. He encouraged her to talk about her memories of Mommy, to share stories, to draw pictures, anything that helped her remember the good times. One day, as they sat together on the couch, Emily pulled out an old drawing Sarah had made for her, one of the many colorful, joyful pieces that Sarah used to create with her. It was a picture of their family, Sarah, John, and Emily, smiling together in a sunlit field. Emily handed it to John and asked, "Do you think Mommy is happy up there?" John looked at the picture, the love that filled it overwhelming. He held it up to his chest for a moment, as if trying to absorb the energy of the drawing. "I think Mommy is happy, sweetheart," he replied softly. "I think she's looking down on us and she's proud of you. Proud of both of us. And I think, in her way, she's still here with us. We carry her love, and that never goes away." It was a simple answer, but it felt right. And in the weeks that followed, John noticed a change in Emily. She wasn't as sad as she had been before. She had learned how to honor Sarah's memory without feeling overwhelmed by grief. She still missed her mother, of course they both did, but they had come to understand that grief didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning how to carry love and loss together. It was a strange feeling for John. He had never imagined life without Sarah, never thought about the day when they wouldn't be together. But in the absence of her physical presence, he had found a different kind of closeness, a spiritual connection to the love they had shared. And that love was enough. It always had been. Even though she was gone, Sarah's legacy lived on in the way they loved each other, in the way they moved forward, in the way they chose to remember. In a way, Sarah had taught him how to love without holding on too tightly, how to let go without losing the essence of what mattered. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One day, as John was going through some of Sarah's belongings, he came across a letter she had written to him just before she had passed. He hadn't read it before. It had been tucked away in a drawer among the things Sarah had prepared for him. He unfolded it carefully and began to read. "My love, I know that this journey is not easy and that it's going to be hard for both of us. But I want you to know that I am at peace. I am not afraid anymore. I want you to remember the good times, the laughter, the joy, the things that we shared. Don't mourn my passing, because I will always be with you. I want you to find happiness again. I want you to live fully, to love Emily with all your heart. And when the time is right, I want you to remember that my love for you never ends. I'll be with you in every sunrise, in every memory, in every moment that you share with Emily. And I'll be waiting for you when it's your time. Until then, live, my love, live. I'll always be with you." The letter was short, but it was exactly what he needed. It was Sarah's final gift to him, her way of ensuring that he didn't lose himself in grief, her way of telling him that life, despite everything, had to go on. Months passed since Sarah's passing, and life had taken on a rhythm of its own. The early days of grief had been the hardest for John and Emily. But as the seasons changed and time moved forward, they both found themselves growing, slowly but surely, into a new chapter of their lives. A chapter without Sarah's physical presence, but one that still carried the essence of who she was, her love, her strength, and her indomitable spirit. John, in many ways, had been a pillar of strength for Emily, but now he was learning how to lean on her in new ways. Emily had grown, too, and her resilience never ceased to amaze him. Though she missed her mother dearly, she was becoming more independent, more confident. She asked tough questions, dealt with her own feelings of loss, and somehow, even at her young age, found ways to heal. They were learning, together, that grief was not something you could conquer in one big leap, but something you could carry with you in ways that eventually became easier to bear. John knew that it was important for both of them to honor Sarah's memory, but he also knew that Sarah would want them to continue living, to find joy again, to rediscover the small things that made life beautiful. The house, which had once felt so empty, was now filled with little sparks of life once more. Emily's laughter filled the rooms, and John began to find solace in their shared moments, however small they might seem. One day, as they sat in the living room together, Emily looked up at John and asked, "Do you think Mommy would want us to be happy again?" John paused, the weight of the question heavy on his heart. But he smiled gently, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. I think she would want us to be happy. She would want us to live our lives with joy, just like she did. She'd want us to love each other, to keep moving forward." And so they did. They found joy in the simplest things, in cooking dinner together, in taking long walks, in spending time with friends and family. They found joy in their memories of Sarah, in sharing stories about her and keeping her spirit alive in the little things they did. John had even started to work on the garden Sarah had always loved so much, creating a small corner of the yard in her honor. It became a place where he could sit, reflect, and feel close to her, even though she was no longer there. But it wasn't just about maintaining the past. John had begun to realize that life was still ahead of him. There were still possibilities. There were still dreams to chase, even if they didn't look like the dreams he and Sarah had once shared. In the months following Sarah's death, John had found himself thinking more about what he wanted for his future. He had always been focused on his family, on providing for them, and on being the best husband and father he could be. But now, without Sarah beside him, he found himself at a crossroads. He couldn't stay stagnant in grief forever. He had to move forward. One afternoon, while Emily was at school, John found himself flipping through old photo albums. He came across pictures of Sarah and him in their younger years, before the cancer diagnosis, before the weight of illness had crept into their lives. He remembered the adventures they had shared, the trips they had taken, the dreams they had for the future. And as he stared at those pictures, a thought began to form, a possibility, a new beginning. Sarah had always encouraged him to follow his passions, to do things for himself, not just for their family. And John realized that maybe it was time for him to start living for himself again, to pursue some of the dreams he had set aside over the years. The idea of taking a new path wasn't easy, but he knew that it was something he needed to do, for himself and for Emily. The decision wasn't instant. It took time for John to find the courage to step forward. But slowly, he started to take small steps. He began by picking up the guitar Sarah had bought him years ago. Music had always been a passion of his, but it had gotten lost in the shuffle of life. Playing again brought him a sense of peace, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was reconnecting with something he had once loved. Emily, too, began to show signs of her own growth. She had started drawing again, something she had stopped doing when Sarah got sick. John had kept all of her artwork, and now he often saw Emily sketching quietly, filling pages with beautiful, vibrant drawings. Sometimes she would even create pictures of Sarah, a memory captured in color. One evening, as John sat on the porch playing his guitar, Emily joined him, her sketchbook in hand. She sat quietly beside him, drawing the sunset as it dipped below the horizon. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the soft sound of John's guitar mingling with the evening breeze. "Daddy," Emily said softly, looking up from her sketchbook. "I think Mommy would be happy we're doing this. She would want us to keep going." John looked down at her, his heart swelling with love. "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think she'd be proud of us." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of understanding. It wasn't about forgetting Sarah or replacing her. It was about living on, about honoring her memory by moving forward, by finding new ways to love, to dream, and to live fully. As John continued to play, Emily began to hum along. It was a small, beautiful moment, a moment of healing, of growth. And in that moment, they both knew that even though they would always carry the pain of loss, they had also found the strength to embrace new beginnings. It was a chilly morning when John woke up with a new sense of clarity. For weeks now, he had been treading water, unsure of the direction he wanted to take in his life. But as he sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the soft dawn light filtering through the curtains, he knew it was time. Time to stop living in the shadows of what he had lost and begin to embrace what was still to come. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something he could have rushed into. But he had come to realize that holding on to the past too tightly would only prevent him from experiencing the beauty that still existed in the world. Sarah had always been the one to encourage him to follow his dreams, to not let fear or loss keep him from becoming the best version of himself. And now, more than ever, he knew that it was time to honor her memory in the most meaningful way he could, by living with courage and purpose. As John made his way downstairs, the familiar scent of coffee filled the air. Emily was already in the kitchen, her small figure standing on a stool as she stirred a bowl of pancake batter. Her presence was a comfort to him, and he felt a sense of peace just knowing that she was there, full of life and possibility. "Good morning, Daddy," Emily called, her face lighting up with a smile that was nothing short of contagious. John smiled back, walking over to give her a hug. "Morning, sweetheart. What's on the agenda today?" Emily shrugged playfully, her eyes twinkling. "I'm thinking pancakes. And maybe a trip to the park after. You know, to make the most of the sunshine." John laughed, the sound light and genuine. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, things were going to be okay. "Pancakes it is. I'm in." As they sat down to eat breakfast together, John's thoughts drifted to the future. He had begun to make plans not just for himself, but for Emily too. It was clear to him now that the world was full of opportunities, full of chances to embrace new experiences, and he was ready to seize them. But it wasn't just about moving on for the sake of it. It was about honoring Sarah's legacy by making sure that their lives had meaning, that they continued to grow, and that they stayed true to the values she had instilled in them. It was a gradual process. Over the next few months, John began to take small steps toward building a new life. He enrolled in a community music class, something he had always wanted to do, but had never found the time for. It was a way for him to reconnect with the joy he had once felt in making music, but it was also a way for him to push past the grief and start creating something new. Emily, too, had found her own path to healing. She joined a local art class, where she could express her emotions through drawing and painting. John was amazed at how quickly she adapted to her new routine. She was starting to blossom in ways that filled him with pride. The pain of losing Sarah was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. They were learning how to live with it, to allow it to shape them without letting it define them. But despite all the healing that had taken place, there was still one thing that John had to do, something that had been hanging over him, unspoken and unresolved. He needed to visit Sarah's grave. The thought of it had terrified him at first. How could he say goodbye when it felt like Sarah was always with him? But as time went on, John realized that this was the final step in his journey. He needed to let go, not of his love for Sarah, but of the idea that he could somehow hold onto her physical presence forever. He needed to say goodbye in a way that would allow him to move forward, to embrace the future that lay ahead. And so, one sunny afternoon, John and Emily drove to the cemetery. The wind was soft, the sun warm on their faces as they walked through the rows of gravestones. John's heart was heavy, but it wasn't as crushing as it had been in the past. He was ready. They reached Sarah's grave, and for a moment John stood still, his gaze fixed on the stone marker that bore her name. The memories of their time together flooded him, the love they shared, the challenges they faced, the dreams they had built. But now, those memories felt more like a treasure, a gift that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He didn't need to hold onto the past anymore. He just needed to honor it. Emily, sensing the weight of the moment, took John's hand and squeezed it. "Daddy, are you okay?" John knelt down beside Sarah's grave, his voice soft but steady. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I just wanted to say goodbye. And thank you. Thank you for everything." He paused, the words settling in his chest. "You taught me how to love fully, how to live with purpose. And I'm going to carry that with me. We're going to be okay. We're going to keep moving forward, just like you would want us to." It was a quiet moment, but it was powerful. John didn't need to say anything more. He didn't need to mourn forever or hold on to a version of Sarah that could never exist again. What he needed was to let her go in peace, to give himself permission to live fully, knowing that she would always be in his heart. They stayed there for a while, each of them finding their own way to say goodbye, silently or with words, or through the quiet act of being present. When it was time to leave, John felt lighter than he had in months. He had done it. He had let go. It had been nearly a year since that moment at the cemetery when John and Emily said their final goodbye to Sarah. The days that followed had been filled with both quiet reflection and forward movement, each step a piece of the puzzle that was slowly coming together, forming a new life, a new beginning. Life, as they had both learned, had a way of continuing whether we were ready or not. And it wasn't until John allowed himself to fully embrace the idea of moving forward that he began to see the beauty in the possibilities before him. He had started to notice the little things more, the way the sunlight streamed through the window on a lazy afternoon, the sound of Emily's laughter filling the house, the calm that had slowly returned to their daily routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And it felt good. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch together, Emily turned to John, her small hand resting in his. "Daddy, do you think Mommy's happy? Do you think she knows we're okay?" Her voice was soft, the question gentle but weighty. John smiled, a warmth spreading through him at the sincerity of her words. He had asked himself that very same question so many times. He knew the answer was one of peace, not just for him, but for Emily, too. "I think she is," John replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I think she's watching over us. And I think she's happy knowing we're doing okay, that we're living our lives, learning to laugh again, to find joy even without her here." Emily looked out at the horizon, her eyes thoughtful, then turned back to him with a small smile. "I think so, too. I think she's proud of us." And in that moment, John realized something profound. He had been so focused on his own healing, on finding his way after the loss of Sarah, that he had never truly stopped to consider that Emily, too, was on her own journey. She had carried grief in her own way, silently processing her feelings, adjusting to the changes in her life. But here she was, thriving in her own right, strong, resilient, and filled with the potential to become someone truly extraordinary. "You're right," John said, his voice full of conviction. "She would be proud. And I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You've been so strong through all of this." Emily grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I'm just like you, Daddy. I'm figuring it out. We're figuring it out together." It wasn't just a cliché, this idea of healing together. It was their reality now. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and it had been forged in the fires of grief, but it was now tempered with something more, understanding, acceptance, and love that had deepened over time. As the days continued to pass, John began to shift his focus. He had learned how to live for himself again, but he had also learned how to live for Emily. To be there for her, to support her dreams, and to encourage her to pursue what made her heart sing. And in doing so, he found a new sense of purpose, a purpose that wasn't solely defined by his past, but by the future he was actively building. One day, as John sat at the kitchen table, he found himself scribbling down some ideas for a new project. It had started as a small seed of inspiration, something he had been thinking about for a while. He wanted to create something meaningful, something that could leave a lasting impact on others. He had always dreamed of writing a book, but he had never found the right time. Now it felt like the right time. The idea began to take shape, slowly but surely, over the next few weeks. John decided that he would write about his journey, about grief, healing, and the unexpected beauty that can arise from even the darkest of moments. It would be a story of survival, of hope, and of how a family could rebuild itself after devastating loss. It wouldn't be easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. It was a way for him to honor Sarah's memory, and it was a way for him to help others who might be walking a similar path. He wasn't sure where this new path would take him, but for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with the uncertainty. This wasn't about erasing the past. This was about moving forward with the lessons he had learned, with the strength he had gained, and with the hope that the future still had something wonderful in store. Emily, seeing her father so absorbed in his writing, asked one day, "Daddy, are you writing a story?" John looked up, smiling warmly. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm writing a story. I'm writing about how we've gotten through all of this, about how we've learned to find happiness again, even after losing someone we loved so much." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's a really good story, Daddy. People will want to read it. It'll help them, just like it's helped us." John's heart swelled with pride. "I hope so, kiddo. I really do." In that moment, John realized that this was the new path he had been searching for. It wasn't about living in the past or waiting for things to go back to the way they were. It was about moving forward, taking the lessons he had learned, the love he had received, and the strength he had gained, and using them to build something new. For himself, for Emily, and for everyone who would need to hear his story. It's often said that the end of one chapter is the beginning of another. And for John and Emily, the end of their grief was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter filled with hope, possibility, and the courage to live fully. They had learned to embrace their past without being defined by it, and in doing so, they had found the strength to look toward the future with open hearts. Life is unpredictable. It throws obstacles our way, challenges us in ways we can't always foresee. But as John and Emily's story shows us, even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of light, a chance for new beginnings, for healing, and for finding a path that is uniquely our own. What new beginnings are you embracing in your own life? How have you learned to live with loss and keep moving forward? Share your story, because sometimes the light beyond the darkness is brighter than we ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?